Hi, I'm Neil.
And I'm John.
And you're listening to World of Telly, the podcast where John and I watch every single TV programme ever made in no particular order. And what are we watching this week, John?
This week we're watching Gangsters.
Gangsters is a BBC crime drama which began as a play for today in 1975 before continuing for two six-part series in 1976 and 1978. It was written by Philip Martin and produced by David Rose, and it stars Maurice Colborne, Ahmed Khalil, Elizabeth Cassidy and Saeed Jaffrey. It also boasts one of the greatest TV theme tunes of all time. We begin the story of Gangsters in 1969 with someone we've mentioned several times on this podcast already, and that's the producer David Rose. So what was David Rose up to in 1969, John?
Well, David Rose in 1969, he'd been the producer of Z-Cars, and he admits himself that he doesn't think the BBC really knew what to do with him. So at one point they made him head of training. And I think our story begins in terms of Gangsters, begins of all places in High Wycombe in 1969. There was a management course, a BBC management course, and it was largely focused on how to improve the BBC's output in the regions. You worked in a university like me, you go to these courses and you have the dreaded breakout groups. Well, unlike every other breakout group in history, this one actually came up with a good idea. And the idea was that there should be a drama unit based in the regions. And actually, ironically enough, the suggestion that David Rose came up with at the time was it should be in Manchester. But actually what happened was that idea, and he thinks it was taken forward from that management course about creating English regions drama that would focus on outside of London, or the regional drama would be based in Birmingham.
The second city.
The second city, indeed. And that's not to say, of course, that there wasn't any regional drama before this. And indeed, in Birmingham, they had studios at places like Gloucester Green. But the thing about those studios, and various programs had been made there, the thing is, at this point in time, getting into the mid to late 60s, they were extremely primitive. And the drama unit was based in Birmingham largely because they decided to open the BBC Pebble Mill studios. Birmingham really sort of boomed in terms of development in the late 60s and early 70s.
It was the place to be.
It was modernity, wasn't it?
According to Telly, it was the place to be.
Yes, Telly looks at Birmingham. You know, did he go there? I don't think so. But anyway, they built the Bull Ring in the centre, and then there was also ATV studios at Broad Street, and of course that great symbol of modernity, which was Spaghetti Junction.
Birmingham's road systems are revolutionary. The Inner Ring Road, Queensway, a 4-mile circuit of dual carriageways, tunnels and overpasses, linking up with the main arteries of the city and the Aston Expressway.
The BBC was slightly copying ATV studios at this point. They put in this incredibly well-equipped set of studios, Pebble Mill, which opened in November 1971.
So David Rose takes up the role as head of English regional drama in 1971, and his remit includes attracting new writers to television. And I believe he only had one member of staff to start with, is that right?
Yeah, he only had one member of staff, and Barry Hanson. Now, I'm not sure whether he was the original first member of staff, but Barry Hanson came on board as a script editor and then became a producer. So it was a very small affair. But one of the crucial things was they were allowed to run their own budgets. And they also were guaranteed a number of Play for Today slots per year. They had something called 30-minute theatre, and David Rose was very keen to get some different branding on that, particularly the use of the word theatre. They became known as Second City First, and that was another way of getting a lot of new writers. His remit was to promote regional writing, as you say, attract new authors to television. And he was really keen on getting people who had never written for television onto television.
And you got quite a few people from the theatre scene in the Midlands, is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Birmingham had quite a burgeoning theatre scene as well. There was the Midlands Arts Centre, there was the Birmingham Arts Lab. Barry Hanson himself, who went on to become a big name in television, he came from the Royal Court. Peter Ansord, who came later, who was editor of the theatre magazine Plays and Players, had a deep knowledge of fringe theatre and also this thing called lunchtime theatre. In those days, you'd go out from work for your lunch and go and see a play at your local theatre. Despite the fact that Rose really wanted to make television, they drew on the theatre scene in a big way. So you had people like Mike Leigh, Willie Russell, Alan Bleasdale, and things just started to really sort of develop brilliantly from that point on. The crucial thing to say at this point, I think, is, that we are talking about England's Regent's drama, which is an amazing thing. There was good work going on in London, but there was a perception that London and a reality that London compartmentalized. It had serials and series and single plays, and people didn't talk to each other. And they were very much set in particular ways, where in Birmingham, it was all about the work and everybody spoke about the work all the time. And writers and directors knew that good work was being created and you could take it in the direction you wanted to take it rather than have the kind of clammy hand of senior management on your shoulder.
While David Rose had autonomy in Birmingham, he did have to go to London now and again. I think he had to attend the Television Weekly Programme Review meeting.
Yes. Now, yeah, he tried his very best to avoid going to London at all and to stop London coming anywhere near Birmingham. But as you say, he had to go to these Wednesday morning meetings. Now, I'll explain what they were, the Television Weekly Programme Review meetings. And it sounds odd, but it also, in a way, I suppose, is laudable. Every Wednesday, the really senior people from the BBC, the ones that were available, but there was a sort of idea that you should turn up for this quite long meeting that started about 10 o'clock and went on for at least a couple of hours. And they'd have a few bulletin points at the start, headline news, often around industrial action and things like that at the start. But then the rest of the meeting was literally taking last week's Radio Times and leafing through it and discussing the programmes that had been on in the previous week. That's literally what it was. So David Rose used to go up for those because it was something you couldn't get out of. And there's minutes for all of these meetings and they're incredibly useful.
Yeah, they're fascinating, yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk a bit about some of them as we go on.
There was one good thing that came out of one of these meetings, and it wasn't actually the meeting itself, it was the fact he was in London at the time.
We've told this story before on a previous podcast, possibly more than one, and we maybe won't tell it again because we don't want to overdo it.
This is what people want.
This is what they want. This is going to drag in the listeners, This is the clickbait that we're after. But yeah, David Rose used to get out of these meetings at around, I don't know, kind of like 12:30, 1 o'clock, maybe a bit later, depending how long the meeting went on. And he used to stroll down from Television Centre towards Shepherd's Bush Green. I've got a stake in this. I used to live in Shepherd's Bush, so I know it well. He used to wander down to Shepherd's Bush Green, but he had quite a long wait before he would get the tube back and get the train back to Birmingham. So he often used to pop into the Shepherd's Bush Odeon. And most of the time, according to Barry Hanson, he used to come back slagging off the filming scene at the cinema. And he often used to go in and only see a bit of the film, either because he'd missed the beginning or he had to leave to catch his train. And this is where we've got the real skinny Neil, because I think I've actually identified the exact date that David Rose went on this particular occasion. I think it was Wednesday, the 12th of April, 1972. And it was the 1:25 matinee showing of The French Connection.
How did you find that out? Just going through the old listings?
It's the Shepherd's Bush Gazette. It has it all. There's not many showings of The French Connection in Shepherd's Bush. And the story has been told enough times to pin it down to the Shepherd's Bush Odeon. So I'm pretty confident that's the date.
Do we know if he ordered any Kiora while he was there?
It was Umbongo.
Oh, okay.
I think that he had. No, the David Rose went in to see The French Connection. He either missed the beginning or missed the end, but he loved it. And he went back on the train and was coming into Birmingham, presumably coming into Birmingham New Street, and he was looking at Spaghetti Junction, the incredible modernist landscape of Birmingham, the kind of like the city above and the city below. And he immediately saw Barry Hanson and said to Barry Hanson, "Do you think we could do The French Connection in Birmingham?" And that was the remit, and an awful lot sprang from that. But the most kind of obvious thing that sprang from that, the specific thing that sprang from that, was Gangsters, the play for today of Gangsters.
Yeah. And this is where Philip Martin comes in. Now, Philip Martin started out as an actor. In fact, I think he was in some episodes of Z-Cars.
He was in some episodes of Z-Cars, and he also wrote a couple of episodes of Z-Cars.
So that's how he must have known David Rose, I'm guessing.
He did, and he was very heavily involved with theatre in Liverpool as well. He was almost like the house writer in Liverpool. He'd been very heavily involved in the lunchtime theatre as well, Philip Martin. And they latched on to Philip Martin to potentially write this French Connection in Birmingham.
They made him live in Birmingham for 3 months, didn't they?
They did. The classic thing is, and shows you the kind of like the nature of the time, I guess, is that David Rose and Barry Hansen told Philip Martin what they wanted, and they paid him to live in Birmingham for 3 months. And they said, if you come back with a play, fine. If not, you've had a 3-month holiday in Birmingham.
The brief was quite broad then. It was just make the French Connection in Birmingham. That was the brief.
Well, that's one of the stories. There is a bit of a variety when I've looked into this, that I think Peter Ansorge, who, to be fair, wasn't there when the play for today was done. He kind of conveys the impression that they were going to do a grainy realism, Ken Loach, Tony Garnett type piece, which they wanted out of it. But that doesn't really chime with the whole French Connection side of things, which is the one that's certainly got more currency, and Barry Hansen certainly tells that story. But yeah, they basically said, explore Birmingham, and Philip Martin went to Birmingham, and he got like a kind of invitation in. He invited himself in under these BBC credentials to work with the police, bearing in mind that they're all bent as 9-bob notes, as my dad would say, as it later transpired, the particularly corrupt police force. He went in with them, and they were on their best behaviour until one lunchtime on his BBC expenses. Philip Martin invited them all to the pub. And the second they all piled down the pub, they all started telling him the true story of all the drugs that were being done, how the canals were being used to pass drugs through. And he also met up with the Futrell brothers, who were a notorious crime family in Birmingham that basically at the time ran everything. The nature of how feared they were was that one day, apparently the story goes, the Cray twins decided to take Birmingham, that they were going to come with their mob, and they fancied running Birmingham. And word got round to the Futrell brothers, and they waited at Birmingham, at the station in Birmingham. The Crays turned up, and they immediately went back to London and never came back to Birmingham again. And apparently Martin got on famously, and Hansen, because Hansen was heavily involved. Philip Martin and Hansen got on really famously with the Futrell brothers, to the extent that the main Futrell brother, I forget his name, was going to be in Gangsters.
Oh, really?
And he'd agreed to be in it, and it was going to be his club, and they were going to film there, and all of this kind of stuff. And then after this had been agreed, probably again down the pub, having a heavy night, Futrell's lawyer rang Hansen the next day and said, no way is any of this happening. The Futrell brother was going to be in a TV film that shows him as being a gangster, which he actually was, which would not have been good. So that got scotched. It was going to be all on film, which wasn't, unheard of at the time in terms of that. But it was going to be about what really happened, the level of crime, what kind of crime was going on, based on 3 months of research. And that's basically what Martin came back with.
Before we go any further, John, I think we need to give a spoiler warning. Now, this is usually where I would tell the listener to go away and watch the programme in question and then come back later. But in the case of Gangsters, it's very hard to actually watch it, isn't it?
It's annoyingly hard. This is a story of kind of Gangsters' existence, really. The play for today was repeated once before the series started as a refresher the following year. And then none of it was repeated until it was on UK Gold in 1994. The play for today wasn't even shown then. It was just the series, and it got shown twice in the space of about 3 months. And then that was that until the DVD came out. The DVD came out, and that suddenly became as rare as hen's teeth and cost a lot of money.
They're about £70 for the box set now, unfortunately.
Yeah, which has 5 commentaries on 5 episodes. But yes, it is difficult to see.
It's not streaming anywhere, is it?
No, maybe its time will come again, because it tends to kind of come in peaks and troughs.
So, yeah, there's going to be spoilers from this point on, and we're going to start by talking in depth about the play for today. Now, let's talk about the star of Gangsters, and that's Maurice Colborne. Now, Maurice Colborne had a theatre background, but I believe Gangsters was his first TV role.
Yeah, that's right. He ran, what was it called? The Half Moon Theatre, which was a sort of left-wing theatre again, fringe theatre. Again, it's all sort of in there. And he was a very serious-minded actor who very much gave them the impression, particularly later when they were making the series, that if he wasn't happy with the way it was going to develop, then he wasn't going to be interested in it. He was a serious-minded professional.
Now, he plays John Klein, who is, I guess, the anti-hero character in this, and he's just been released from prison. He's ex-SAS, and he's been put in prison because he killed the brother of the guy who now runs the underground criminal aspects of Birmingham, who is played by Philip Martin.
Yes, that's right.
And he finds out that the nightclub that he co-owns has been taken over by this Rawlinson character. It's basically about Rawlinson trying to get revenge on John Klein and John Klein trying to survive and get his money and leave. That's basically the plot, I think.
That is basically the plot, and I think it really reminds me of the Klein character. Reminds me of Lee Marvin in Point Blank, you know, the John Boorman film, where he just wants his money. You know, that's the thing. He's happy to leave. He just wants his money, and he's happy to leave, but he kind of keeps getting sucked into the machinations. And as you say, I think Philip Martin playing Rawlinson is effectively sort of like a character like the Futrell brothers. Rawlinson has umpteen brothers, doesn't he? It almost becomes quite comic that there yet another three brothers seem to come out of the woodwork at various times. So yeah,
He has a very good Birmingham accent, I've got to say.
I take your word for that. I thought it was pretty good as well, but he's very much a Scouser, isn't he, Philip Martin?
I don't like the smell of this curry.
Part of the plot revolves around illegal immigration, trafficking people from Asia to come in and be exploited, basically.
Yeah.
And that means that you've got Saeed Jaffrey playing an incredible part. He steals every scene that he's in. And the other hero of the piece is played by Ahmed Khalil. Now, he plays an undercover cop from Pakistan called Khan, and I'm guessing it must have been really unusual in 1975 to have an Asian main character.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Pebble Mill, there'd been a play that had been done. There was a woman called Tara Prem who went on to become quite a big name in TV, a big producer. She did a play called A Touch of Eastern Promise. Tara and the director went out on the streets actually asking random people if they'd be in the play, because of the fact that they weren't going to obviously do anything other than have actual Asians playing those characters. But, you know, they felt that in Pebble Mill, in Birmingham, it wasn't like they were having to go to different places to see and different kind of ethnicities. It was all, it was there, and it had to become a subject of the kind of thing that English region drama would talk about. And later that led to a series called Empire Road, which was another groundbreaking series at the time. So Gangsters absolutely has that. It's about that. As you say, the lead roles are played, and they're not small roles. They're not tokenistic in any way. They're totally key.
How many Asians in the Midlands?
Bleeding millions.
Please, let us work on a figure that there are 10,000 illegal immigrants, each prepared to contribute at least a £5 note towards my party funds.
50 grand a week, I know.
2.6 million a year.
Theory in it.
A possibility to work towards. Now, both of us are equal. Both of us have a lot to lose.
Now, while you can argue that Gangsters has very progressive casting, it's still got a lot of complaints in the local community, especially in the Hindu and Sikh communities, where they didn't like the fact that most of the Asian characters that you saw on screen were involved in criminality.
No, I mean, it was very controversial just generally, wasn't it? I think in terms of, you know, the local press covered it in quite a bit of detail. This kind of feeling around Gangsters persists to this day, I think, when you see some academic pieces written about both the play and the series, is that it does have great representations of different ethnicities. You know, virtually everybody in Gangsters is horribly compromised.
We'll return to this subject when we talk about the series as a whole, but do you think the play for today met the objective of being the French Connection in Birmingham?
Well, I think it does in some. I mean, there is an absolutely explicit homage to it. There's a famous club scene in the French Connection quite near the beginning where the 3 Degrees are singing a song and Popeye Doyle, the Gene Hackman character, is wandering around. And you can almost extrapolate all of the club scenes in both the play for today and the first series in particular of Gangsters from that. And you do get car chases.
Yeah, the car chase is hilarious. The car chase with 2 panda cars around Spaghetti Junction and under Spaghetti Junction as well. They go round and round in a circle. It looks ridiculous.
The kind of reviews at the time were like, absolutely fantastic car chase, or it was so boring, it went on for a long while. And I'm never quite clear whether it's supposed to be a slight parody of a car chase and a parody of Spaghetti Junction, because everybody who worked at Pebble Mill seems to talk about Spaghetti Junction like it's either with pride about actually understanding how to get around it or with trauma of their time being kind of lost on it. It's got thoughtful things in it. It's about politics. It's about crime in a local area. It's about kind of multicultural city and the issues that people have navigating that and all of those kind of things. But it's entertaining. It's a thriller. It's
Yeah.
a film, it's not a million miles away from any kind of film that you'll see. And that was quite unusual at the time. In fact, very unusual, to the point where people just did not know how to take it.
Yeah, the reaction from both the BBC and the critics were kind of similar in the sense that some people thought this is not the subject matter for a Play for Today. Play for Today is supposed to be about something serious, whereas this is just pure entertainment.
And you see that played out in those Television Weekly Review minutes, because you get somebody saying it was an insult to Play for Today. And Christopher Morahan, who was the head of plays, in this very typical BBC sort of slightly dry way, said he thought it important not to over-define Play for Today. Because you've already getting that idea that Play for Today is prestige, and this is letting the side down. Gangsters is somehow doing that. And then David Rose at the same meeting said, he's concerned that people think that Play for Today should be of a certain kind of play. And that's really what kind of sums up why Gangsters was so different, because people just did not know how to cope with it or thought that it didn't fit into the slot it should fit in. And the Daily Mail, there's quite an interesting quote from there, which both brings in the play and Philip Saville, the director of the Play for Today, which is, should a precious drama slot have been squandered? Play for Today has always previously had some purpose, not merely audience titillation and vicarious delight. Philip Saville must stand so charged.
The Daily Mail also said it was sickening brutality and too much sensationalism for its own sake.
Yep.
The Sunday Times said vicious and vacuous.
Mm-hmm.
The Daily Telegraph said that the BBC have let themselves down. And The Guardian said Gangsters is a crime.
Yeah, that was Nancy Banks-Smith, wasn't it?
Yeah, they did not like it at all.
Yeah. Didn't she also say that the author is the villain? Quite a loaded, interesting comment. Well, he was literally, but yeah, there was a kind of, and that's what's really fascinating about Gangsters, I think, in that, because the thing, this is what David Rose did and what they were doing was like you're saying, it doesn't have to be something that is worthy. As long as we've got something that's intelligent, we should be able to make these kind of things. And of course, what I think happens because of that is you get Barry Hansen moves away pretty much straight after the Play for Today. He goes to Thames. You end up with, as we've said before on other podcasts, in fact, like we did on Out, you ultimately end up with Barry Hansen working on The Long Good Friday. You could then argue that Gangsters leads through some of the better Euston Films material through to Long Good Friday. And what more influential film can you probably name in British cinema than The Long Good Friday for the subsequent decades? And I think it's an intelligent piece of work that is absolutely works on its own merits as an action thriller as well. And that all comes from David Rose popping into the cinema.
I really don't consider your running away a lasting solution, Mr. Klein.
Up the pool, down the smoke, first train I'm on it.
Rawlinson has a contacts in both places, or if not him, one of his many brothers. Like a Napoleon, our Mr. Rawlinson's a great believer in nepotism.
I don't care what his religion is.
He wants you dead, Mr. Klein.
Now, am I right in thinking that the Play for Today was almost not transmitted?
You're absolutely correct. And the reason it was nearly not transmitted and sort of became the first in the line of things like Scum and Brimstone and Treacle, this can be blamed on a series called Churchill's People, which was a 26-part absolute disaster of a period drama for various reasons I know an awful lot about. I've written an academic article about it with Ian Greaves.
I've seen one episode and it was terrible.
It's truly dreadful, but that's for another time. But the key thing here is that around the time, and it goes back again to the television review meetings, At the time that Gangsters was about to be shown, the start of January 1975, that was when Churchill's People had started. And the first few episodes of Churchill's People were so bad, people were about to throw themselves out of high windows, level of disaster. And the second episode was directed by Philip Saville. Now, Philip Saville, huge amount of respect, but he'd done this Churchill's People, which was set in Rome and Britain, which had somebody's hand getting chopped off. And it was very violent, and it caused all manner of stink. And because of the fact that the weekly review meeting was talking about that episode of Churchill's People, Hugh Weldon, I think it was, who already didn't like the idea of Gangsters, he thought, hang on, Philip Saville, he's directing Gangsters. I don't like the idea of this. And he basically got this Star Chamber affair together of selected senior managers to watch it. And this was apparently the day before transmission of Gangsters. So Hanson, Philip Saville, and some others were hauled into TV Centre, sat in the BBC club, probably having a few stiff drinks, while this Star Chamber of various people watched it. Hugh Weldon thought that they'd say, no, you can't show this. But they came out actually saying they thought it was terrific. And they really, really liked it. I think they asked for one small edit. So actually that was kiboshed and it went ahead as normal, but then did indeed get a massive amount of controversy.
Another controversial thing was the BBC felt that Birmingham was being portrayed in a non-realistic way, that this kind of thing never went on. And in the week of transmission, wasn't there a big story about the trafficking of illegal immigrants into Birmingham? So it became very topical all of a sudden.
It was quite amazing. It was a couple of days before it was transmitted. And again, with the minutes of these meetings, it's hilarious because you get the director of programs television, Alistair Milne, I think it was at the time. You know, there was this whole big news story that was all over the nationals as well as in the regional press in Birmingham, where some legal immigrants had been found and were being trafficked. And he just says the program had achieved an element of fortuitous topicality. It's the most kind of grudging thing you could imagine. The criticisms they were leveling, it was largely incomprehension, I think. And this is not what we should be doing as the BBC in the Play for Today slot. And if not in the Play for Today slot, it's hard to imagine where else it would be done. But then also criticising it for being ridiculous, an inaccurate portrayal. And of course, later with Alistair Milne and things like Scum, it was, you know, this is not accurate. This looks too much like a documentary. It's not accurate, therefore it must be banned. And you've got that line coming in, but because the men who went to see the Play for Today of Gangsters expecting to condemn it actually had a rip-roaring time and enjoyed it.
All I want is out of this bastard second city of this. I've done time for his brother. Either we call it quits, or I'll kill him and any more of his bleeding. How many cases sent against me? Okay, good enough for your side? Good!
The critics didn't like it very much, but the audience did. It got a very high audience appreciation index, didn't it? In comparison to a normal Play for Today.
In comparison to a normal Play for Today, yeah, it did. And the ratings were pretty good as well, despite being on opposite The Sweeney, which was in its early days at that point, and The Two Ronnies.
I'm guessing that the good ratings was the main factor for it going to a series?
It was Brian Cowgill, who was a controller of one of the channels at that point, must have been BBC One, I guess, eventually. And he was one of the Star Chamber who'd reviewed it, and he absolutely loved it. I guess saw the ratings and the appreciation index and thought, yeah, I'll have more of that. But he really wanted to do it very quickly, which put Martin under the cosh straight away. And it also couldn't be all on film because it would just be too expensive. So he had to go down the traditional studio film mix.
That is the big disappointment when you go from the Play for Today into the series, that it goes on to videotape. But having said that, the directors of that first season, Alistair Reid in particular, someone we've spoken about before, because he obviously goes on to do Artemis 8-1, he does some incredible stuff given the limitations of the videotape he was working with.
Yeah, he does. He's a great director. The two main things he does, it's not like nobody had ever done it before, but the two sort of significant things he does is a lot of handheld camera at a time when you did not have Steadicams or lightweight cameras to use. So I pity the cameramen who had to do it. But what he does, and I think, you know, again, we talk about the French Connection and the club scenes, he really goes to town with that in the club scenes. And there's a lot of the series is set in the clubs. So there's a lot of handheld camera. There's some extraordinary things where you're sort of watching it at one point thinking, what on earth's going on here and how did you do it? Which is he fakes kind of cinema widescreen.
It's incredible.
which I don't think I've ever seen before.
He sort of stitches 3 shots together, doesn't he?
Yeah, on the commentary of the DVD, David Rose actually breaks off and says, "How on earth did you do that?" So that was quite interesting all those years later. I think it was David Hare who flourished at Pebble Mill, the playwright David Hare. He mentioned at one point how he hated the idea of using Studio VT because he basically said, unless you're a genius like Philip Saville, why would you even bother trying? And I think you can add Alistair Reid to that very short list of people who were real artists of VT.
Definitely. So the first series of Gangsters picks up immediately after the Play for Today finishes. They repeated it the week before to get people back up to speed. Because if you hadn't seen the Play for Today, I think you'd be lost immediately.
Yeah.
Because it deals with the aftermath of the Play for Today. Because in the Play for Today, the Rawlinson character is killed. And it looks like John Cline's going to go to prison, but he is released to work undercover with a Khan to bring down this illegal immigration ring. And it's got all the same characters that you had before. But what's interesting is the villain is the henchman from the first Play for Today has sort of been promoted to the role of villain. Paul Barber, he's played by. And he's an incredibly interesting character, almost Shakespearean.
I think Philip Martin says a number of times, he obviously liked the line that Malleson gets a sort of intellectual upgrade between the Play for Today. I mean, again, people talk about the second series of Gangsters being highly stylized, but straight away you're into a very different world in the first series, I think, because just the dialogue from Malleson, as you say, it's not only is it Shakespearean the way that the gangs meet, and I think quite a few of the people talked about how it was a bit like the War of the Roses and those kind of Shakespeare plays, but it's just the syntax is completely all over the place and very, very arch.
It's not naturalistic at all.
No.
The Klein bastard's off the streets. The law have lifted him from the Maverick, and he's finally down as market leader for the Rawlinson murder.
That's good. That's very good. But let us also remember his henchman Khan. Oh, what that dum-dum is remains to be discovered. What is known as his joint responsibility with Klein for an unwarranted attack upon your beloved chairman.
Right on.
And
right on.
For scrambling the ghoulies of several distinguished members of this present board.
I think that first series is pitched almost as a Western. John Klein is referred to as John Wayne several times. As a scene where he's standing in front of a film projector showing Stagecoach.
I mean, he even says at one point, there's a line of dialogue, isn't there? My name's John Klein, not John Wayne. That much is definitely kind of there. I mean, you also have this ongoing story of his relationship with Anne, who's played by Elizabeth Cassidy, who in the first series was the gangster's mole with a heroin addiction.
Mm-hmm.
But in the second series, he's reaching at the start rock bottom and he's put into a rehab unit by Klein, who agrees to say that he's her partner so she can be let out of the rehab unit at some point. That's where the kind of layers of the series are quite interesting, because while it's stylized, there is this kind of non-romantic, on the fringes of romance with their relationship as it goes through as well.
And again, race plays an important part throughout the whole series. And it's very topical today, I think, watching it again. I mean, the whole anti-immigration rhetoric that's built up, and also the fact that the people behind the people trafficking, it'd be like finding out that Nigel Farage was paying people to cross the channel on boats so he could get political capital out of it. So it's very relevant today, I think.
It is. The Rafiq character played by Saeed Jaffrey, as well as being a politician representative of the local community, he's also the fairly amoral trafficker of people. But then he debates on TV with the fascist, the leader of the local fascist party, defending his local community. But then, as you say, it transpires that leader of the fascist party is actually the one who's trafficking. And part of the trafficking is to actually have an influx of people so it actually raises tensions within the community. There's a whole plot going on there. John Abineri plays the particularly evil fascist leader, and Rafiq doesn't like that. It pushes against the limit of what Rafiq is prepared to do, which is a lot. And he's got his henchman Kuldeep, who apparently never been an actor before. He kind of like this was like the first thing he's been in.
It's a strange
basically.
Performance, I've got to say, but unforgettable.
It certainly is.
I mean, he's terrifying one moment and absolutely hilarious the next.
Yeah, he's really, really unpleasant. at times. And that's one of the things that you certainly get is that there are times when you're sort of, as it goes on, you're almost sort of supposed to forget the terrible things almost that they've done because of the fact towards the end of this series, Kuldeep is the one who gets imprisoned for murdering one of Khan's colleagues. But Rafiq was in the room watching when he murdered his colleague. You know, it's kind of, it was under his encouragement. So there's a lot of very dark stuff going on in there.
My alliance party needs the Asians in the same way as Hitler used the Jews, to construct a platform to political power. You see, as our society crumbles, the white Briton looks around him for a scapegoat. And he sees brown faces, and he sees black, and he sees only one party that offers a radical solution. And so he's prepared to act, to vote.
The more immigrants, the more fascist votes.
That's right. You see, the money your fellow Asians pay for the privilege of entering Great Britain illegally goes to pay my campaign funds.
I mean, I suppose we should mention the cliffhanger, shouldn't we?
Yes, especially the first one. First one's really memorable, where Klein is strapped to a bed in a disused house, a rundown sort of squat, and it's just about to be destroyed by a wrecking ball. It's something out of an adventure serial, isn't it?
It is. I didn't see it when it went out, but it would have been absolutely in keeping with all the repeats of Flash Gordon. And he even has a to be continued in very flowery script appears on a freeze frame each time. But I still find it astonishing how they even filmed that one. When they're running out of the collapsing house, they are just in a collapsing house. They talk about it on the commentary that they just were looking for places that might be about to be knocked out. There's a lot of comments about kind of guerrilla filmmaking that they did in a number of different areas on this. They sort of add to the kind of unreality of things that every 50 minutes you stop for a freeze frame cliffhanger.
And that first series of Gangsters was just as controversial as the play for today, mainly, I'm guessing, because of the depictions of sex, drugs, and violence.
Yeah. Again, there's a combination of you're making this thing about Birmingham and we look terrible because of it. Because everyone is a criminal. Everyone is dealing drugs. Everyone of all nationalities and ethnic backgrounds are all venal and terrible. And it looks like a shithole, basically.
Well, that's Birmingham.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's the kind of thing. And yeah, as we talked about, you've got the upper, you know, the modern bit, and then the lower, which was the thing, wasn't it? I mean, the same thing was happening in Newcastle. You had the idea of the city above and the city below. Everybody's going to have walkways floating in the sky, and then only cars will be down there, as opposed to lots of terrible crimes going on down below. So there was that, but then there was also, I think, a general kind of bewilderment about it as well, because it just didn't fit into any obvious category. When it seemed to be quite serious at times. You've got serious scenes that then are alongside baroque, highly stylized dialogue. But then all the way through it, you've got certainly in the first series, you've got quite compelling political story that does indeed resolve in a twist that the local politician, the fascist politician, is actually the head of the drug and immigrant cartel.
I think that first series is very satisfactory for a viewer in terms of if you stick with it, you do get a complete story. But a lot of people found it confusing. Like you said, the Daily Mirror said it was confused and confusing and way over the top. The Stage said it was a very silly series. It hadn't seen anything yet, but yeah. No critics seem to love it. That's the thing. How did it do in the ratings?
It did okay. I mean, Thursday night, it was on at like 9:25 on a Thursday night. Thursday night was one of the nights that ITV used to have its quota of news program, documentary program. So it used to have This Week on, I think, on Thursday night at like 9:30 or something like that. They did well enough to get a second series, but I don't think it had a huge amount of competition on that Thursday night slot.
So we got a second series, and again, I've got to stress, if you can watch the program before listening to what we're going to spoil everything, I wish I could have seen Gangsters without knowing what was going to happen. The very first day I met you, John, I've spoken about this before, was at a Doctor Who convention in 2005. And our very first conversation we had was about Moonbase 3. The very second conversation we had was about Gangsters. Now, I'd never even heard of Gangsters. I thought I had quite a good handle on classic TV. I'd never even heard of it. And you went into great depth and told me every single thing that happened in the second series. And I didn't believe you. I just thought, this is making this up. I've only just met this guy. Why is he telling me this stuff?
Why am I gaslighting?
Yeah. And then when I went in to actually watch it, obviously I was prepared for what was about to happen. If you can go into it not knowing anything about it, I can't imagine what it would be like. I bet it'd be incredible. Did you know when you first saw it?
Well, I did, because of the fact that I think when we talk about the aftermath of Gangsters, I think the thing that I knew about it was because of how it was covered by the academic community. The academics love talking about the second series because of its radical nature. And so I'd been kind of tipped off for that. And then there was a few other things that tipped me off about it. But actually, I only saw the last episode of the first series. I don't think I've mentioned this before. I'm pretty sure I'm not misremembering this. One of the reasons we got our satellite to get UK Gold or cable or whatever it was then was because I realised that Gangsters was being repeated. But I couldn't get it fast enough to see the first series of it. It was actually the repeats. Yeah, so I only saw the last episode, I think, of the first series and then went fully into the second series, and it lived up to my expectations of how off the rails it was.
It's insane, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it doesn't muck about. I was expecting all the weird stuff to come towards the end, but in the first 10 minutes of episode 1 of season 2, you've got Philip Martin reappearing, not as Rawlinson, who's dead, but as himself, sitting in a busy Pakistani street. They actually went to Pakistan, dictating the script to someone on a typewriter sitting next to him. And that's in the first 10 minutes. I mean, what must have people thought?
Well, I don't know whether it's an indicator of the fact that not a huge amount of people watched it, but the critics, rather than sort of reacting to say, what the hell is going on here, they're more of just keeping on the line of this is a non-serious, silly program.
Yeah, I noticed that. No one mentions it, do they? No one mentions.
Barely, yeah.
It's crazy. I mean, that to me, it's for 1978, primetime BBC One, to have the writer appear as himself dictating the script in Pakistan of all places. It's just, and that's the first 10 minutes.
As he's dictating the script, you see the two characters he's describing walking down the street in the way he's describing.
They stroll past camera on Sador Road, follow their progress for a moment, then cut to Chinese ritual basement, Birmingham.
I think we have to go to the question of why is the second series like it is. It's unclear to me still, really.
I have a theory.
Okay. Well, why don't you start with your theory?
Well, my theory is that Philip Martin just got bored of writing these characters and just thought he'd take the piss. That's what it seemed to me. There doesn't seem to be any point to it other than that.
What I quite like about it is the fact that there isn't a reason for it. I think, there's a combination of things. I think, firstly, it's important, I think, to remember that as we talked about, Play for Today in the first series is based on 3 months of research in Birmingham into the criminal underworld. His research into the Chinese community, I mean, it is hinted at, and he says himself he didn't intend it to be that way, but there are some Chinese characters appear towards the end of the first series. And it even ends with Khan going to talk through with the Chinese connection. But he claims he didn't really know it was going to go there. But I mean, he didn't do the kind of research that he did for the first series. He himself claims, and it's slightly cringe-making, that he was basing a lot of it on Fu Manchu.
Yeah, you can tell.
Yeah, you can. And reading about the triads. But to me, going into parody is probably a bit of a safer option as well, if you're that light on representing, because he talks about when he's on the commentary, and it's true, and we will keep, I think, after wheel back to this, that in the end, although it's great, it's a multicultural show, it has loads of kind of opportunities for actors of different ethnicities, it's all written by a white guy who was working in fringe theatre. You can't really forget that. It's problematic in that sense. And then there's also the fact that he mentions this thing about something dislodged in my mind. When it was about to go out, or as it had started to go out, he said, "The new Gangsters reflects my change of attitude. I became very dissatisfied with the conventional TV series." That comment is almost what you're saying, really. He'd written the first series in a real rush, very similar, even though it becomes more stylized, to the Play for Today. Suddenly he's given a bit more time, and he's probably thinking, well, what the hell? I've killed off lots of the characters. What the hell have I got to do now? And so he goes off his chump. You mentioned about filming in Pakistan. I mean, that in itself is a story that we haven't got time for. They had enough of a budget to film in Pakistan. David Rose went out there. He's in it. in the first episode, I think. You can see
Oh, is
him.
he?
Yeah, yeah. He's sitting at a table. They went to Pakistan and they ended up doing it in the middle of a coup. General Zia took over from Benazir Bhutto's dad, and they were there then. And most of it was done guerrilla style. They just did it without really asking because it was chaos at the time. The guy who plays Khan's dad actually ended up living in England after that. He basically ended up living in England because he was quite associated with the previous regime. So it all kind of ties in. And the whole thing about him dictating to the guy with the typewriter, that was pure chance. Philip Martin knew he was going to have to write some of it when they were out in Pakistan because of the fact that he wouldn't know what he wanted to write until he saw the locations. But they didn't have a typewriter. So he saw this guy was doing like work for anyone. He was a guy for hire. People would like get him to write letters to their bank and things like that and dictate to him. And he just thought, oh, I'll use this guy. And they just decided to incorporate it. So they had no idea to do that until they got there and saw this guy with a typewriter.
So they were literally making up as they went along.
Literally.
Exterior, Sador Road, day, pan up, and along balcony until Rafiq appears from an inner room.
I don't think Philip Martin's got anything very interesting to say about race at all. He uses it as a backdrop, but it's not saying anything interesting about race, I don't think. But, you know, I'm a white guy. What do I know?
I know. I agree. I think that's one of the kind of crunch things that you come to the conclusion. Certainly come to the conclusion by watching it again. At the time they were doing the Play for Today and the first series of Gangsters, Birmingham Rep had a play submitted to them by somebody who'd written a lot for it called David Edgar, who'd written a play called Destiny. And Destiny was about the rise of fascism in the 70s, going back to the Second World War, and it seeds in the Second World War. And David Rose was on the board of Birmingham Rep, and the Rep decided that it was too combustible to be performed. And it ended up getting done by the Royal Shakespeare Company in the other place, I think it was called, wasn't it? The other theatre that they had at Stratford, and then went on and transferred into the West End. Now that play, which then was filmed as a Play for Today, not by BBC Pebble Mill, but it became a Play for Today. Now that is a thoughtful play about race, and it stars Saeed Jaffrey. And that is a really, really incredibly powerful play, but it has a lot of similar figures. It has fascist leaders, it has NF type people, why they are managing to recruit. It says a lot for now. I think part of the first series of Gangsters says a lot for, about today as well. But Martin is using it for different reasons. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but I don't think you should look to Gangsters for it saying anything that meaningful or profound about anything. Maybe this is why the academics took it up so big at the time. It's about pleasure. It's about playing with genre. It's about those kind of things. It's not, I think, a profound piece of work.
It's a parody, isn't it? The second series is a parody of gangster films, a parody of Fu Manchu films. A lot of it in that first episode particularly reminded me of Doctor Who. It looks like something from the talons of Weng Chiang.
Yeah, to be fair, at one point after the ceremony where they're swearing in new people into the triads, the father and daughter, Lily Lee and Shen Tang, both sort of admit that the blood isn't real blood. It's all fakery and it's all for show. It's constantly undermining what's going on in it.
Ooh, what a ghastly smell, Daddy.
The real thing would be worse. Blood of a rooster, wine, cinnabar.
This?
Knowing Mr. Young's obsession with economy, it is probably blood and water from frozen chicken.
My problem with the second series of Gangsters is that when you know all this is going to happen, it's very hard to take any of the plot seriously because it's like, why should I care? Because you obviously don't care because you're just going to undermine it all at the end anyway. Do you know what I mean? Series 1 had a story you could follow and feel quite satisfied by the ending, whereas Series 2 is all over the place.
It is.
It's mainly about 3 different assassins Three Chinese assassins. Shall we talk about them in order?
Yeah.
The first one, Red Stick. We first meet Red Stick standing in a forest, and there's a 5-minute montage of this ninja cutting trees down with his hands.
Flinging stars about.
Yeah. The second assassin is dressed as someone from a 1930s gangster film.
Yeah, what's his name?
Double Petal.
Oh, God, Double Petal. Yeah. You find yourself slightly dying inside when Double Petal comes along. Yeah.
That's the point I think I tune out, where I think they're not taking it seriously enough for me to care about the plot. And then the third assassin is played again by Philip Martin, and he's playing W.D. Fields. Now, do you know who Philip Martin originally wrote that part for?
I do.
Les Dawson.
Les Dawson.
Can you imagine it?
There's a bit, I think, that made me laugh a lot in the second series of Gangsters. At the end of the first episode, they have a sort of montage of what's coming up in the series ahead. And it ends with Philip Martin as W.D. Fields running towards the camera. And that just cracks me up every single time. Because I just imagine you're sort of 9:25 on your Friday. You've watched the first episode and you see this montage and there's this behatted figure running with a big red nose looking like W.C. Fields. And that just makes me laugh my head off every single time.
You're the most incredible guy I've ever met in my entire life.
That's a compliment coming from you, who I hear ran a sporting house of considerable range and repertoire.
Tell me, why do you act, dress, and talk like William Clauducan Fields?
Because it amuses the most important person in the world. Myself.
On the DVD, on the commentary, because they're all there, people like David Rose and others, all there with Philip Martin, and even they are stunned into silence at the W.D. Fields. When he's doing the bit where he's training the ninjas, who, by the way, all fight each other, and they look like small kids in a judo class kind of fighting each other. It's the most unconvincing bit of fighting I think I've ever seen. But no one knows what to say for the W.D. Fields performance. The story goes that Philip Martin was taking his kid for a walk, I think, in a pushchair. And he was walking along, and this voice came into his head saying, W.C. Fields brings death to Birmingham. And he thought, where the hell did that come from? And we are still asking that question now.
I am the master of the 87 positions of coital pleasure.
87?
I'll grant you the final 17 require the uses of a well-equipped gymnasium. But I am confident that the Olympic Committee will grant their validity as being kosher.
W.D. Fields kills John Klein simply by touching him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they kill the main character off with half an hour left of the programme.
Which, again, you take your hat off to it with an elaborate kind of funeral scene with a million in-jokes with name-dropping. It even has Brian Cowgill's name appear on one of the gravestones, doesn't it?
Lost to the Thames.
Lost to the Thames, because he's just moved to Thames. So you are talking to a series by this point which is just people playing.
There's a moment, isn't there, where Anne ends up in a weird subplot, doesn't she? She ends up in a really tedious subplot where she becomes a secretary because she's sick of being in the world of gangsters.
Yeah.
And there's a moment where she goes for a job interview. She either has a moment of self-awareness that she's a fictional character, or Philip Martin just couldn't be asked finishing the script. So she just turns to the camera and says, I think we'll cut the dialogue there. It's incredible.
It is incredible. My frustration now watching it is why they didn't do more. I guess, and the thing is, it's the fact that, as you say, the first episode starts, you're straight into Philip Martin dictating the script. But then actually a lot of that, it becomes a bit few and far between with some of the sort of fourth wall stuff. There's no plan to it, is there, basically? There's no sort of real intent there. Funnily enough, I read the novelizations, which are awful, of Gangsters. And I went to that scene to see what he did, because he only wrote it comparatively recently, not long before he died, the novelization of the second series. And I went to that scene to see what he did with it in the book, and he just doesn't do it. He just ignores the fact that Anne says, I think we'll cut the dialogue there.
It's like ending a Monty Python sketch. That's what it reminded me of. You know, when they can't find an ending to the scene.
Yeah. Now, when you're out of your mind drunk watching that in 1994 on UK Gold at like 1 a.m, that goes down very well, I'll tell you that.
The last episode is where it really goes completely bizarre. Anne has a conversation with Saeed Jaffrey's character, who's now working undercover for the CIA. And it's such a ridiculous moment in the plot that she starts laughing and then turns to the camera and says,
That's got to be the end.
And it pulls back and you can see all the lights and the cameras and all the rest of it. It's just Philip Martin saying, I can't be arsed.
He certainly didn't want to do any more, that's for sure. Apparently Maurice Colburn was perfectly happy with being killed off as well.
We need to talk about the music by Dave Greenslade. Now, Dave Greenslade's done 3 amazing TV theme tunes. He's done Very Peculiar Practice, he did Bird of Prey, and Gangsters. Now, the music in Gangsters is fantastic. If you like jazz rock or progressive rock with some mellotron, I think the theme music is incredible.
It's great, and of course you get the wonders of the 2 very different versions of it, don't you, as well?
Yeah, the second version, they bring in a singer, Chris Farlow, and it's an incredible performance.
Run to the one that keeps you in style for a year or a day. Run from the one that haunts you, she'll never come to play. Run, it's too late to leave the race now.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard Chris Farlow sing in that way on anything else he's done as well, which is quite weird.
They released this as a single, didn't they? But they didn't trouble the charts, I don't think.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. I've got to say, though, the incidental music is sometimes the most inappropriate music I've ever heard in my life. There's a scene in, I think it's episode 2 of the second series, where it's an incredible stunt where you got these 2 guys in a car and Klein throws a petrol bomb at it and the entire car blows up, and then you're straight into this comedy harpsichord music.
Yeah, I mean, there's that very weird scene that is the cliffhanger when, what was he called, Red Stick, comes into the house, incapacitates Anne, and then has this bizarre fight with John Klein, where you have this sort of music alongside it, which is absolutely, I think I showed someone that. I said, come and watch this program, because I'd recorded it off UK Gold. I said, watch this, and showed them the start of that episode, and their face, it always gets people, that particular scene, I think.
Actually, the music leads us on nicely to some of the season 2 reviews. I've got one from the Daily Telegraph. Gangsters is like eating curry and chow mein to the sound of a Moog synthesizer. You make it sound like a bad thing.
Yeah, exactly. That sounds fantastic.
The Guardian called it Hong Kong Phooey.
Cool, okay.
Clive James in The Observer said it's junk, but the junk bounces. So, damning with faint praise there. And the Daily Telegraph's review begins by saying, I can bring the nation good news this morning. Gangsters ended last night and there are no plans for a new series.
Yeah, I think there was an evening, not the Evening Standard, the London Evening News. There was a guy who basically had a vendetta against it. Every single week he wrote this thing saying, I have complained to the governors of the BBC, etc., etc.
And surprisingly, somebody who really didn't like it was Dennis Potter.
Yes. What was that phrase he used?
He says, is a series so obnoxiously delighted with its own gaggle of second-hand styles that it seemed to be licking itself all over. He called it downright immoral.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, I suppose we should say, I mean, the BBC were much the same. And actually, those weekly review minutes just get more and more.
There's one that it says, this is getting silly now.
I love the way that they say things like, well, it's just hokum now, isn't it? I love that kind of phrase. And David Rose, I don't know whether this is deliberate, doesn't appear to be at the later meetings. But even at this stage, they can't help but be horribly wrong about things, because someone pipes up, I think it's Desmond Wilcox, pipes up at one point and says, a Chinese woman who's been to Rodin. I hardly think that's likely. And then somebody else pipes up and says, well, actually, I think something might have happened like that. And I had a look through the newspaper archive, and sure enough, about 10 months before, front page news, there was a Chinese woman who was smuggling heroin into the country, and she'd been to Rodin. And it's clearly what Philip Martin took the idea from. But I suppose they tried to bring to a head all the controversy that it had had with the local press by actually having a special program just for the Midlands straight after the last episode.
It's like a public inquiry, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's like, how many series have a public inquiry at the end of them? I mean, you have things like maybe Threads and the day after. The only other one is Gangsters Series 2.
The Mayor of Birmingham was on the programme, I believe, along with David Rose and Alistair Reid and Philip Martin.
Yeah, and nobody knew what to say because nobody really could make out what the hell had been going on. They'd all just been watching the last episode. Sadly, it doesn't exist anymore, which is a real shame.
This ended up on an Open University course, didn't it?
It did. It was the popular television course. There were two kind of outputs to that. There was a book, which was in my local library, popular television and film, which was a sort of primer. And it had two essays on gangsters in it. And that was where I first became aware of it. That would be early 80s. And there was a related documentary that was to accompany the Open University course, which I never saw, which is a bit of a shame because I used to kind of try and keep up with OU programs. Because at the time, for any youngsters out there, of course, there aren't any youngsters out there, Open University programs used to be on like Saturday mornings, kind of 11:30 at night sometimes on thing. And apparently, and it got at least 4 or 5 showings, I think, this program with lots of clips of gangsters and quite a long interview at the end with Philip Martin. And I think that helped to keep its memory alive. It's quite a good little summary of how batshit the series is, basically.
Yes. But surely you were taking a risk with Gangsters there, because it's a series which starts in a fairly conventional, naturalistic mode, but then actually develops into something much more parodic, much more almost surrealistic in effect. Weren't you in danger of alienating your audience there as well?
Yes, I was, but curiously enough, those I did alienate were replaced by people who actually got much more pleasure. But in an intellectual sense, they enjoyed the references. They enjoyed the breaking down of the standard, run-of-the-mill, totally predictable 5-situation type crime series which we're running on. So it had disadvantages, yes, but it also had advantages because the audience, in fact, changed.
John Wyver, who was the TV critic at Time Out at the time, really liked it and wrote quite a substantial preview for every second series episode, apart from the last one, because apparently they finished it incredibly late in the day. So he didn't get a preview of it. But he arranged with some others a Gangsters Day School.
Right, what was that?
It was basically an event with a couple of presentations. John Wyver did an introduction. The cast and crew were invited, and because they were all based at Pebble Mill, they all came pretty much. Not Maurice Colburn, I don't think, but Saeed Jaffrey certainly did. And David Rose and Peter Ansorge and Philip Martin all came and had an enjoyable time. And 2 of the presentations became papers in the OU book. And again, that sort of gave it a real impetus. It became this sort of poster child for non-naturalism on TV. And though Potter didn't like it, and Potter had been doing his own thing with plays like Follow the Yellow Brick Road and things like that, which also ends with the TV studio coming into view, which was from a couple of years before, Potter really went big with non-naturalism, did a famous speech at the Edinburgh International Television Festival, and then, of course, did Pennies from Heaven, where characters break into song. And so I think it had a real kind of cachet because of what followed as well. Not even if it wasn't a direct influence, though I suspect Potter often slagged things off, but actually took quite a bit from them.
Let's talk about what happened to some of the main protagonists of this story. What happened to Philip Martin?
He was really quite kind of hot at the time, and he got commissioned to do a play for the National Theatre. It's really unfortunate. It was a dystopian world of the future, sort of in Manchester. I think it was largely set in Lancashire. It's an environmental catastrophe. So by the sound of it, I've not read it. By the sound of it, quite prophetic in its concerns. But it had this really terrible title. It was called Thee and Me. And it wasn't only a disaster, but it was such a disaster. Its disastrous nature was on the front page of the stage and television today. It broke records by becoming the first play to crash out of the National Theatre repertoire because no one went to it and it got awful reviews. And the first paragraph of this, it has a picture from the play, and then it just says, unlucky dramatist Philip Martin was described as terribly upset. And later on, he just basically says he just wants to be left alone to get on with his career. It went really, really badly for him then. I mean, I'm sure he was a very affable kind of guy, I think, Philip Martin.
Yeah.
But he sort of became a jobbing writer. He did Shoestring. He did an episode of Shoestring. He did Star Cops. It would have been 2 episodes of Star Cops, but one got, because the series got curtailed, didn't it? Because of, I think, industrial reaction. He got awards for radio plays. And of course, I'm leading up to the pinnacle for any writer. He did John Nathan Turner era Doctor Who.
Yeah, 2 Doctor Who's, one of which breaks the 4th wall, or sort of breaks the 4th wall.
The cliffhanger of Vengeance on Varos is a cliffhanger about a cliffhanger, isn't it? It couldn't be more Gangsters. really, in terms of what he wants to do with it.
But that wasn't the peak of his career. The peak of his career is when he was involved in the reboot of Crossroads.
Oh, was it? Yes, he was, wasn't he? Yes, and then he did Hetty Wainthropp Investigates.
And David Rose went to Channel 4, was poached, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was, as was Peter Ansorge. And in the background all the time at Thames, you've got Jeremy Isaacs. No fool, Jeremy Isaacs, doing his own great brand of radical stuff on Thames at the time. You had Verity Lambert doing things like Rock Follies, Place for Britain, Bill Brand. He knew what the story was. He kept an eye on Pebble Mill and was thinking, yeah, I want some of that. And as soon as he got Channel 4, he got David Rose over there. And David Rose went on doing a similar thing to he'd done before. He worked on Film on 4, but he commissioned stuff he knew wouldn't necessarily get a cinema release. Not everything for the Film on 4 brand got a cinema release, but you ended up having some massive hits with things like My Beautiful Laundrette and other things as well, and had an absolutely fantastic career. And Peter Ansorge went on with things like GBH, with Alan Bleasdale and others, and had a phenomenal career as well. They never failed to stop talking about gangsters, which is interesting. Peter Ansorge wrote a really good book called From Liverpool to Los Angeles, and he sees gangsters as being this thing that led to so much.
Say Jaffrey went on to become a household name in My Beautiful Laundrette, and Morris Colborne was also very famous in Howard's Way.
Yeah, Tom Howard, the famous maker of other than wooden boats in Howard's Way. He wanted to go into fiberglass, didn't he? And various other materials. Of course, Doctor Who. We shouldn't forget that he was in John Nathan Turner era Doctor Who, playing Lytton.
He died so young, didn't he? That's the thing.
Ludicrous, incredibly fit guy. One of those awful things where he was doing up his house in France and his wife heard him collapse in the courtyard. He was just carrying a ladder or something. 49. I remember really being shocked because he was also really good in a series called Johnny Jarvis, where he played Brendan from K9 and Company, Ian Sears' criminal father. There was something about him. I know a lot of people thought he was kind of wooden, but I thought he was interesting. There was always something happening, I thought, with him, and a really interesting actor. But no, that was a really tragic thing.
So to sum up, you would recommend Gangsters?
Oh, yeah. I think I could watch it in 10 years' time and I'd get something different out of it.
I'll hold you to that. Meet up in 10 years' time to do another podcast.
Just every 10 years, however many of those we've got left.
Just a reminder to join our Patreon at patreon.com/World of Telly. It's completely free to join. And there's going to be an essay there waiting for you right now about Gangsters. What's this week's essay about, John?
It's about two things. It's about the Gangsters Day School. I've got the programme. The actual programme, I'm going to put an image of that up. And I'm also, and this is what will really get the listeners and the readers in, I'm going to show my working about which performance of The French Connection David Rose went to at the Shepherd's Bush Odeon. It'll all be there.
I can't wait to read it.
Who can? No one can.
And what are we watching next time, John?
Next time we're watching Wonder Man.
So join us for our next podcast. And until then, I've been Neil.
And I've been John.
And you've been listening to The World of Telly.
Goodbye from the world of telly.
So long, Birmingham.